Our world is one rife with a dizzying degree of cultures, traditions, beliefs, and languages. In fact, there's approximately 6,500 languages left to choose from. Fortunately, for all of us struggling to retain the basics of even just one language, we don't really need to speak of anything in order to secure a spot on the winning team at the Darwinian Olympics. The unspoken language of symbols has taught us almost everything we've needed to know about survival. From the start, we figured out that when the Neanderthal with the large stick showed up, that meant it was time to run. And yet, even today, there remains a symbolically primal instinct buried within each of us. The fight-or-flight senses trigger when we catch a glimpse of the glow within the eyes of the apex predator in the pale moonlight. And by that, of course, I mean the headlights of a Vapid squad car. The distinct shape of the Vapid Stanier's headlights have been culturally ingrained into our minds, courtesy of cheesy Vinewood movie and TV, also pairing well with Vapid's decade-long reluctance to make improvements to the formula, unless the feds get involved. Those pencil-pushing nerds were always forcing Vapid to baby their beloved consumers with fringe gizmos and gadgets like passenger airbags, protection from combustible fuel tanks, and seatbelts. The Stanier was in large part then a band-aid response to the changing trends of automotive consumerism. By the time the Berlin Wall had collapsed to reveal an anemic Soviet Union, and the computer had become personal, it became clear the 80s were over. And by that January morning, everyone rose from their beds, both hungover and outraged that they still had one of those bulky boxes out front. People began voting on the future with their wallet. Cars like the Marbell were suddenly out, and cars like the Solaire and Fortune were all the rage. And with that, Vapid got to work, sanding off the corners and redesigning its first-generation Vapid Stanier of the early 90s. Of course, it was the same platform from the 70s and the 80s, only this time it used a name from the 50s. It was about the same size as what came before and guzzled a similar amount of fuel. But it was different. This thing had curves, it had roundy bits, because it was the future, damn it. And of course, the people loved it. Vapid only sold their Stanier in 3 flavors: Civilian, Taxi, and Police Interceptor. And the best part was you could wind up in the back of all 3 of them, depending on the night you were having. This meant the Stanier earned itself the reputation of fleet car. It was a modular vehicle which could be mass-produced faster than you could say wee-woo. And that's why after all these years, Staniers are still hotly contested for action movies, cop shows, demolition derbies, and whackers who want to play police dress-up. In fact, there's nearly as many Staniers out there as there are police drama TV shows. With that being said, if you wanted the sensation of gliding down the freeway in a 2-ton land yacht, without the people in front of you eyeing their speedometers like a ticking time bomb, there was in fact another way. Dundreary had nearly armed every senior citizen across the continent with a more estate-looking Admiral. The Admiral was built off the same platform as the Stanier, yet it came with its own pair of reading glasses and a V8, but we'll get to that in a second. Another small footnote is the Albany Washington, otherwise known as the car which follows you around when you've learned too much. While we don't have any records proving it, the Washington appears to be the illegitimate conception of Vapid and Albany, while the Class A and Dundreary weren't looking. Anyways, the interior is everything you'd expect from a car selling for government pennies. Cassette players and working radio clocks are luxury options, so sky's the limit here. The back sports a bench suitable for all shapes and sizes of criminals, and just like the floor, the seats are upholstered with vinyl. This made cleaning out the orifice juices from the prisoner cage just about effortless. And in terms of cargo, the Stanier's trunk space was designed to be capable of holding everything from spike strips, shotguns, suitcases, and small families, all in a single trip. However, Vapid's been a little dishonest. The Stanier comes pre-packaged not with the V8, but with a 4-cylinder, and no one's really sure why. The smaller engine, of course, gives a more reasonable power range, but the fact that Vapid didn't even bother to equip this lumbering sedan with a V6 is baffling. All we do know about Vapid is that they had to produce the Stanier family of cars up in Canada, so there may have been some degree of compromising going on just to ensure that these cars could qualify as imports for US domestic markets. While the Stanier's iconic design represents the commanding presence of no-nonsense authority, it's also the embodiment of a child's impression of the word car. Considering what it has under the hood, it shouldn't surprise you then that its performance is aggressively average. And even despite its weight reduction, special rear gearing, and heavier suspension, this X-Squad car struggles to keep up with modern road traffic. Keep in mind though, speed was never the goal of the Stanier. It's more akin to a mobile office than a pursuit vehicle. Now when it comes to high-speed police chases, the helicopters and radios tend to do the heavy lifting anyways. The platform went on to include one last generation of Staniers, which matured to fit the style of its civilian cousin models. But there simply wasn't enough lipstick in the world that could disguise this aging pig. Ultimately, the smoking gun came from its own parent. Vapid was getting tired of waiting for the sedan to die, so, like it had with the civilian market, it unplugged the Stanier from its fleet car life support. What followed was a brief generation of smaller Interceptor squad cars, though this didn't stop departments and precincts from stockpiling the last of those second gens. If you're in LS, the Stanier has become nothing more than a scarecrow in the fields of urban traffic. By the early 2010s, the Stanier ceased production. Along with it, the reign of America's most iconic piece of road authority.